Thank you. So, as you can tell from my slides, I have the benefit of Tanya having put this together for me, and the privilege of giving her slides. In working with Tanya and Randy, I've learned a lot about science management. It was a very steep learning curve. I came from, I would say, a very traditional academic lab setting where people did everything. Like the trainees did everything from running your experiments, ordering reagents, curating the data, writing the papers, but also, lab management stuff like dealing with lab expenses and budgets and things like that. And there was never a formal set of skills set out, right, for a lot of us in our training as to how we might do that. And it's been very nice to work with a group of people who value a more formalized set of knowledge and skills to help make, I guess, science more efficient, more productive, and easier for those of us who do it day to day. So what I'm going to do today is cover the basics of project management in science, specific to science, and cover the what, why, how, and then just do a brief case study with the Virtual Brain Initiative, or TVB, as we might say. So, what is project management? A project is really a temporary endeavor. It has a very clear start and a clear end, right? It's not necessarily short in duration, but it's something that at the end you end up with a product, a result normally, let's say in science, a paper, for example, or a service, right? Or let's say a set of software you share to the research community. A project can involve either just a single person in the lab, it can involve other team members from the lab, it can involve different kinds of people from multiple disciplines across an institution, or it can, and what Randy mentioned is it's moving towards a far more multidisciplinary approach where we have more and more outside collaborators working on a single project. And that can span not just kind of within a city or province, but can be international as well, right? So what management gives us in light of what projects look like these days in science is a formalized set of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to really tackle the day-to-day problems that we have in projects. And project management consists of really 5 underlying processes. In neuroscience, we talk about, processes, and I like to think about these in similar ways. These processes, and I'll cover this in a little bit more detail next, is there's initiation, there's a planning phase, there's an execution phase, a monitoring phase, and a closing phase. And these aren't necessarily serial, and I'll talk about this a bit more, but all of these exist within a project, and it's really nice to be able to identify all the activities that go into each of these processes, right? And what management ends up allowing us to do is we have all these challenges of trying to balance scope, quality assurance, a schedule. Budgets are really difficult to balance, resources and risks, and these all have pros and cons. They all play off each other. And so what project management does is allow us to have a broader picture of all these things, allowing us to balance all those challenges. Okay, so a project life cycle consists of those 5 processes or phases I talked about. In the first, this initiation phase, is really about identifying what the project is, defining it, and usually you probably have some kind of kickoff meeting, right? And so that initiation phase is probably pretty short-lived in time, and there are not that many activities associated with it, right? The next phase really is the planning, right? So this is where you establish your scope, you define and refine your objectives as you go, and you define your tasks or your course of action. Okay, so in that planning phase, the activity really ramps up, and it can last a much longer period of time, right? And this is where the refining objectives becomes part of the activities maybe further down the line. Because science and your results change, or something about your project will change, and that's where management really comes in terms of refining those tasks and objectives. Then there's the execution phase, where this is where you do the tasks, where you execute all the work that you've planned out and all the tasks that you've defined. And that has probably the most, the largest number of activities. This is probably the phase that we're all most concerned about and most familiar with, is the actual execution. And then there's a monitoring phase. And I think this is a hidden layer of project management that really is very important. And because in this case, you're deliberately tracking, reviewing, regulating the performance, the progress of the project. You're trying to identify, what needs to be changed. And so it pretty much spans the entire life cycle of a project. And there are a lot of activities associated with that too. And then in the closing phase, this is where you finalize all your activities. As the execution finishes, the most important parts of the closing phase is really identifying the lessons learned and legacy documentation. This is really huge, especially with open science and the and kind of the push towards transparency and reproducibility. This is where documentation and kind of documenting all those lessons learned is really important. So, there are lots of examples of projects in science. Some are really obvious. Your research project, your thesis project, your dissertation, for example, or your experiment, your study is an obvious one. We even call them projects. But there are quite a few types of activities, or I guess products, that fall into what we could consider a project. For example, a grant application. Presenting an abstract at a conference like CAN. Knowledge translation activities can be a project. Administrative duties, there are lots of these when it comes to lab management. Collaborations, and I'll touch on that a bit more later, and even organizing events such as this is really a project, because they all have very specific sets of activities, and those phases of the life cycle can be applied to all of these kinds of projects. And Randy touched on this already, but I really wanted to make a strong point about why project management is not a nice to have, but really a need to have at this point in the science landscapes. Funding is really competitive, right? And it's moving, a lot of these funding agencies are moving towards funding very large-scale, multidisciplinary collaborations, right? Where you're working with people who have very different expertise than you across the globe, and there's a lot of money to manage, because these are budgets that are very, very large. That comes with, as always, publication pressures. There, as Randy mentioned, data sharing is a big and kind of like ongoing activity that we're now participating in for open science. And we're moving towards, rather than kind of basic research, right, with these multidisciplinary and collaborative approaches, more into partnerships with industry, right? And that comes with, a lot of types of projects that are high risk, but also high reward, and the funding landscape is also reflecting that. And so with all that in mind, this is why I think project management is becoming a really necessary set of skills to have, and tools and knowledge that we should be implementing in every scientific endeavor. So Tanya chose this, and I really like this quote: "Those who plan do better than those who do not plan, even though they rarely stick to the plan." Okay? And I think what this highlights is that in project management, we make a very deliberate plan, and we have it all mapped out, but we also accept that with the monitoring phase, things change, right? And that means our plans have to change, and we have tools to allow for those changes and track those changes, and that's essentially what project management is kind of like a fluctuating, ongoing process. It's really dynamic. All right, so how? How do we do project management? And I don't have too much time to touch on these. Project management is a very large industry in itself. But there are some really nice tools that they've come up with that I think are fairly useful and specifically in science management. And we'll just touch on a few now. The first is the project charter. Right? This is a master document that kind of links to and points to all the other tools and documents that you have for a project. Those documents can include something that's called a work plan, or known as a work breakdown structure. That work breakdown structure really outlines different activities or milestones that you have for along the whole life course of your project. You can assign within that work breakdown structure all the people who are responsible, who are responsible for each of those steps. There's a communication plan. These are really important, especially with large teams, right? So you're outlining in a communication plan how often you're communicating, who you're communicating with, and what kinds of information different stakeholders need to know, right? So it can be very detailed. You can say, for example, some activities that you probably already do every day are like regular lab meetings. That would end up in your communication plan, right? Who attends those regular lab meetings? How often are they? And what is the purpose? What is being communicated? But then you can also have communication plans that include, for example, reports that you need to make to your grant funding agency, right? So those yearly or semi-annual reports are communications that you need to have with your stakeholders. So that would be your funding agency. There are documents you can have for stakeholder registry, so identifying who all your stakeholders are, right? And within that, you can break that down into who would be for each activity that's in your work plan, who would be responsible for that activity, who would be accountable, who should be consulted, and who should be informed. And so the same person might kind of exist in each or many of those categories, and overlapping, but it's not necessarily always the same people who fall into each of those categories, right? A really big one, I think, in science, because results and hypotheses and predictions are always changing, is risk mitigation, right? Identifying what the risks are, and then having a plan on what you do if X happens, then we implement Y. There's a way to use resources, to track resources, like a resource index, and of course, budget. Budget's a huge one. So having some tools to track your budget. Gantt charts are a really nice way to visualize and track a project schedule. So what you have are tasks that are defined over time, and it includes things like your resources and whether those tasks are dependent, right? So it's a direct way to monitor your progress. You can identify problem areas. So as you track along time, you say, oh, we're at this time point, but we're kind of behind on this activity. What can we do to kind of get back on track? So you can implement those changes to ensure that those milestones are met, that they're on time, on budget, and it really is to keep your sanity intact. And then to help you do all these things, there's a lot of software, lots and lots of software. I would say it's really trial and error as to what you would like to use. And what I find helps is software that's flexible, because you're probably looking for something very specific to science management, and it's kind of a different beast on its own. So I think Tanya's identified some of her favorites, and I really like some of these too, is Trello, Merlin, Git, and Excel. Basic old Excel actually does a pretty good job of creating some of these tools. Okay, and the last thing I want to cover is the virtual brain. This is an international consortium that started, I would say, 10 or 15 years ago now. And it was to build a open source software platform for modeling or simulations in neuroscience, using neuroimaging data. And it has been, it's a really good case study because it's a very large multidisciplinary collaboration. But that means because it's international, face-to-face time or meetings is really infrequent, usually just at international meetings like Society for Neuroscience or Organization for Human Brain Mapping, which is only a couple times a year, right? And yet we all work on projects together constantly and daily. And you know, everyone spans various time zones. There are different working styles, right? There are cultural differences and personal, like, I guess, personality differences. For example, we're talking about a very large group of personnel. And that comes with certain challenges. And there's also jurisdictional disparity. So both nationally and just within institutions, how each institution has, you know, their own ethics and their agreements and contracts and, you know, policies. That's a real big challenge, I think, with multidisciplinary, like international collaboration. So project management gives you tools to kind of meet those challenges. I already talked about this multidisciplinary team. You know, it includes scientists, clinicians, trainees, computer engineers, mathematicians, graphic designers, lawyers, finance people, and of course stakeholders, you know, the public, our donors, our funders. And so the nice thing about being a program manager, which is what Tanya is for the TVB, or the virtual brain, is that you end up using kind of like a master of all approach. You get perspective from all of these different disciplines, and you try to have some expertise to try to glue it all together. Okay. Now, the virtual brain is actually a program rather than a portfolio, a project. So what a program is really a portfolio or an umbrella term for a lot of projects that fall within the virtual brain. A lot of those projects are overlapping in time, right? And what a program manager does is ensure that there's congruent effort and to avoid redundancy, right? So you might have two different groups who identify a very similar problem and trying to work towards a solution to that similar problem. But without someone kind of coordinating the communication efforts and all of that, you end up having redundancy. It's not very efficient and it's actually costly, right? And there are really a wide variety of needs as part of this program, is because it involves, you know, basic research, involves clinical application, knowledge translation. It has a lot of intellectual property considerations, public relations, as well as technical type things. And then, I know Randy mentioned this too, is that in the era of big data comes big money. So we have, as part of Virtual Brain, a lot of large-scale projects that use a lot of data. And these are data, for example, if you're familiar with Human Connect Home Project or the Biobank in the UK, these are like genetic or neuroimaging databases where we're talking about hundreds or thousands of subjects. And that requires, like, in using those data and doing projects on those, you know, studies on those data requires a really solid data management plan. You know, we've got, because it's, you know, such a large team and large initiative, we've got multiple sources of funding, and funding that totals over $20 million. And you can imagine that that means budget tracking is a very large task and a necessary task. And also, so is, you know, just the number of grant applications we put out as a group. So tracking submissions and also the reporting that comes with, you know, each successful grant. Okay, so that's it for me. Thank you very much. I am very much looking forward to discussions today. I'm hoping that I've kind of started to thinking about how, you know, project management really is a necessary thing in the current scientific landscape.
Before we move on, any questions for Kelly?